I'm very hard-pressed to think of anyone who previously became president of the United States who came to the presidential campaign as well qualified and with as much already achieved on this point, on the points that need to be addressed, as Senator Warren does today.
As you know, and I think most people know, Elizabeth has a wealth tax. It is one of the most talked about plans that she has put out. It is one of the most popular plans that she's put out. Can you talk to us just a little bit about really what that concept means and kind of how we got here?
Sure, Maya. Well, I think that is the heart of the matter, which is since the 1970s, so let's say over the past 40 years, the United States has become much more unequal in terms of income, in terms of wealth, in terms of health. We used to have, hard to believe perhaps, we used to have a relatively progressive tax code. We don't anymore. Now we have more or less a flat tax in terms of total tax, all the tax that everybody pays, and at the top end, we're talking about the top, say, 0.1%, they pay less tax as a percentage of their income than you and I or other members of the middle class do. It's striking, remarkable, it's new, and it's very awkward.
That wealth inequality isn't just about wealth accumulation, it just becomes about its access to healthcare, its access to so many other services, because at the core, we have that inequality that is being compounded with each generation.
Absolutely. So, for example, Senator Warren's wealth tax proposal, so the basics are 2% tax if you have more than $50 million in total net worth. That combination would generate between $2.75 and $3.75 trillion. With that, you can do a lot of things. You can help people, families with children who are struggling with childcare. You can put money into historically black colleges. You can reduce or eliminate substantially almost all the student debt that exists right now in the United States. And these are huge, massive, move the needle policies made possible by a relatively small tax on a relatively few people because they're so rich.
I
mean, I know successful people who have $1 million, $2 million, $10 million in net worth. They're not affected by this at all. It's only if you hit this very high hurdle of $50 million net worth, so that's the value of your assets minus the value of your debts, then you're subject to the 2%. And the 6% total tax on billionaires only kicks in, well, as you would guess from the name, when you have $1 billion in net worth. So that's very, very few people.
When we kind of list the things that this would generate revenue to pay for, these are things that are net good, right? We're talking about our universal child care and pre-K. It's sort of this cradle to college, system that is going to be able to protect people and make sure that people have access to quality education and are entering the workforce. So I think the interesting piece about this is that it's generating so much for the economy.
Absolutely. So the research, for example, done by Jim Heckman, University of Chicago, shows that early childhood education is the most important determinant of what happens later in your life. So education would include the child care piece, it would include access to pre-K, it would include making sure that transition from cradle into the education system is as smooth and as well-resourced as possible. And that's what Senator Warren's plan is all about, focusing on that. That by itself creates opportunity, spreads prosperity, boosts the economy. That's the single best way to increase long-term economic growth, if that's what you want to get out of this, and to help communities that have really struggled in recent decades. While a few people have acquired enormous fortunes in the United States, many, many people have been left behind. So it's a very, very small adjustment and ask, even on the super rich billionaires, in return for a massive positive impact on American society. Why exactly are they saying no to that? Honestly, and I'm not being facetious, I don't get it, because it is not an appreciable, discernible dent in their standard of living or in the prospects of their children, frankly, in return for which their contribution will fund an American renaissance. What's not to like?
Right, absolutely. It is interesting because this is an actually incredibly popular proposal. It's something that Democrats, Republicans, Independents actually all come together around, which is saying something for what feels like a very polarizing moment in our politics, for people to come together around an idea, and around an idea that does it sort of a big idea.
I think Americans like fairness. Yes, they like competition. They like to win. I understand. We have a Super Bowl with one winner every year. Absolutely. But But there's rules and there's fairness. And I think what people have increasingly understood, particularly due to the various accomplishments and messages from Senator Warren over the past decade, is that the system is rigged. It's no longer fair.
Right.
The rules are not the same for everyone. That's not fair. That's not reasonable.
Right.
And I think most Americans get that. That's exactly why the wealth tax is popular, because they understand that you can tweak it a little bit, turn that dial a very small amount, and just for the ultra wealthy, and you'll get much better outcomes for millions of Americans. Any capitalist system, any market-based system has at its heart some form of taxation. But what form of taxation? Is it fair? Is it unfair? Does it redistribute or not? Do the resources from that are collected through taxation flow into where they're needed, which is to help people who are relatively disadvantaged, who want to climb up, who want to have better lives for themselves and their children, but they can't. And they're just hitting these walls again and again and again, which brings us, of course, back to that financial crisis, because that was the biggest wall or just collapse of opportunity.
I wonder if you can flesh out a little bit more about really, how did we at one point create the largest middle class we'd ever had?
Well, the big achievement, Maya, was during and after World War II, when the US really changed from being a very unequal, very difficult place for workers to being much more pro-worker, much more pro-trade union. There was a big expansion of the overall macroeconomy. There were very large government investments in research and development, creating new industries like microelectronics, computer industry, modern pharmaceuticals, all came from big strategic government investments, created new manufacturing enterprises that employed a lot of people. And the income disparity between the CEO in those companies and the people who were at the relatively low level of wage earning was not very high. Certainly nothing compared to what it had been before and what it became afterwards, more recently. So I think, we shouldn't ever exaggerate any phenomenon of some sort of golden age, but the achievement in building a middle class and bringing many, many millions of people into a level of never previously seen prosperity in the 50s and 60s was remarkable. And I would include in that the civil rights movement, because I think the extension from economic rights and economic prosperity to civil, social rights, and insisting, as Martin Luther King did, that everyone belongs and everyone can participate, that was a very big new idea for America.
Absolutely.
Right?
Right.
Now, we've lost it, honestly. We have gone through some form of dark age with regard to the income inequality, with regard to the prospects for children who are born into poverty or non-prosperity today. They're not going to be able to climb out, Maya. That's what the evidence says, and we know there are many reasons for that. And while in the 50s and 60s, I don't want to exaggerate the extent to which everyone was pulled in, because some people were excluded.
Right.
Many more people are now excluded, and people who were previously, who got a foothold in the middle class, have been beaten back time and again, most recently by the financial crisis, 2008, 2009. As you know, the impact of that crisis was very unequal across different communities, and people of color disproportionately suffered financial losses, loss of their houses, right? And went back 10, 20, 50 years, perhaps, in terms of wealth accumulation.
Right.
I mean, the massive injustice, historical injustices that we've had in the United States are back. And I think all of this would be massively helped by exactly the package of big structural changes that Senator Warren has proposed.
Thank you so much for joining us, and please keep tuning in.